Hello and welcome to Money Control Muhuda Trading Special. I'm Mahalakshmi. Life can be understood backwards, but it has to be lived forwards, noted Danish philosopher Soren Kierkegaard. Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, borrowed the line and made the connection with stock markets. I'm reminded of this quote because today we've had a fantastic run over the past 1 year, and today, as we step into the new year 2078, we are standing at a crossroads. Indian markets seem to be emerging out of a long spell of weak investments, a very weak earnings cycle, and a paralyzed banking system. We are willing to put COVID fears behind and spend our way to growth. But on the other hand, challenges galore in the global landscape: supply disruption, monetary tightening, Chinese slowdown. There are a whole bunch of imponderables. And on top of that, markets have this nasty habit of springing surprises from quarters that you least expect it from. To bring clarity amid this chaos, we have the most wise men in the stock markets. I'm delighted to introduce to you the panelists for today's discussion. These are amongst the brightest stars in the Indian stock markets, and I must say they are aligned on money control today. Ramesh Damani, a very influential stock market investor; Manish Chokani from Enam Holdings; Devina Mehra, First Global; Sameer Arora, Helios Capital; Madhusudan Kela, MK Ventures; Sunil Singhania from Abacus Asset; Prashant Jain, CIO of HDFC Asset Management; and Ramdev Agarwal from Motilal Oswal. Thank you so much for taking the time out. So, my first question really is: central banks around the world are trying to calibrate their moves in a way that they do not hurt the markets. We heard the same thing from RBI, that we will do everything to ensure that any changes will be done through a consultative process. Theory tells us that no entity, even the central banks, can really fight the markets. But central banks have used that Brahmastra at ultra low interest rates to defy that. Most of you will agree with me that this Brahmastra has been overused and abused. And secondly, fiscal burden on governments around the world are at a historic high post pandemic. So, my first question really is there something very fundamental that we need to challenge in this environment? Do we really need to revisit this long held belief that equities are the best asset class in the long term? And secondly, will this year be the year that tests the limits of this monetary Brahmastra? And what will be the impact on the stock markets? And I think Manish Chokani or Ramesh Damani, either of you can shed some light on that global macro environment.
We wish you a very happy Diwali to yourself, your team, and your audience, and to all my fellow panel members. It's great to get together with Diwali. It's a tribute to you, Mahalakshmi, that you get all of us in one block of time. So thank you for arranging that. Equities have historically, as you correctly pointed out, been the best asset class over long terms. But of course, in the short run, they're extremely volatile and they go down quite a bit. But looking at the current market scenario, we believe that interest rates will remain low and that yields and growth will provide a great opportunity, and equities will remain the asset class of choice over the next year, probably over the next three to 5 years. At some point, equities will top out and clearly the returns will start diminishing. But we don't see that scenario right now.
Manish, do you want to add to that?
I mean, your questions are two different parts. The first part is equities being the best performing asset class. I think there's no taking away from it that if you take the list of the richest people in the world over decades, it is going to be because of their equity ownership, not because of anything else. You don't find someone holding gold or property or something becoming the richest person in the world. And it's usually on the back of one or two businesses that a person will create. So I think we shouldn't denigrate equities in that sense. It may be from time to time overpriced, underpriced. That's a different matter. But there's no going away from the fact that one has to be in equities. On your second question about what global macro does, I've always believed we make money bottom up. We can lose it top down, but we have to make it bottom up by buying a business for less than it's worth. And that rules don't ever change. You're right to point out that the central banks of the world have been playing with fire since the global financial crisis of 2008. And we also know that in this case, the fireman is also the arsonist. So the belief that the markets have central banks will bail us out or whatever is going to be tested at some point. But as you've seen in the case of Japan, they've gone to 150% of GDP on their central bank. Europe is slightly less, US is still less. So, as Ramesh and I'm sure a lot of the other panelists will say, that while rates are going to rise over the next 12 months, it's not something which makes everything pop and burst. So, it's not like a 1970s type scenario where you basically kill all asset prices because of a inflationary shock or a very high interest rate regime.
I'd like to add something on that. When we are talking about the central banks really being guided by the markets and hence being very reluctant to raise rates, we are looking at it slightly myopically, because sitting in India, we typically only look at India and US and we think, that's the world. But the fact is that across the world, emerging markets in particular, central banks have raised rates not just once, but even 2, 3, 4, 5 times, even from Brazil and Chile up to Russia. Rate hikes have been going on for a while. So, in fact, India is an outlier in the emerging markets where the rate hikes have not happened, and yet, I mean, it's my call also that they won't happen in a hurry, probably. But that this is what the scene is. Within the developed world, it has still been the smaller markets like Norway or New Zealand and 2, 3 others which have raised rates. So that's a very different scene. And to my mind, I mean, before coming to the second part of what you asked, to my mind, the thing is that by holding on to rates, India is probably taking a risk with its currency. So for me, that's where probably the macro will play out. That if you hold on to the rates because with justification, you are not in an economic growth position where you can raise rates that easily without killing whatever little growth you've had. So that then, and also that the currency has been in a band for a very long time. And if you look at the rupee, it typically either slowly declines every year, depreciates every year, or you have a long time when it is stuck in a bond and band, and then it suddenly moves. So that's where it might play out. So that as far as the macros and the interest rate scenario is concerned, that's where we are.
So does that pose a risk from the foreign investors' perspective, Samir? The very fact that the policy intervention from our side, the bias from the central bank side may be to keep interest rates low as far as they can.
No. But before that, you said that whether the current policy of US mostly keeping low rates, is that when it is challenged, will it affect the long-term attractiveness of equities? The point is that even before this whole cycle started, let's say in 2002, after the 2001 9/11, or maybe 2008, even prior to that, for the previous 100 years, equity had outperformed. So equity is not going to be challenged just because in the short term somebody brought the rates down a lot. But I don't think that India actually is in a very sweet spot currently, both in terms of its relative attraction and in absolute. So how do we say that? If you look at it for the last 5 years, let's say, and you look at flows into India relative to other emerging markets, not China, but look at Korea, Taiwan, or any of the Asian markets, you will find that not only is India getting money which is disproportionate to its weight relative to these markets, but in many years, like last year, it has been in a completely opposite direction. That means India is getting some 20 billion and Korea, which actually has a higher weight, is losing some 25, 30 billion, which according to me means that people are not giving money to India as part of an emerging market allocation or an Asian allocation, but are making a specific allocation to India. Otherwise, it makes no sense that if Korea is, say, 50% higher weight than India, that India is getting 20 billion in and the other country is getting 20 billion out. And that has been happening for 3-4 years. So I think that as China was a separate sort of category within emerging markets or within Asian markets or whatever, now there has been a separate allocation to India. So if the Chinese market is threatened a little bit, the natural beneficiary of that is a country which looks like China and which they were already liking. It would have been a different story if we say the foreign investors were not liking India. Now they don't like China and therefore they will start liking India. No, they were already disproportionately investing in India. If there's a problem in a market which is 3 times the weight, then you are just putting a little bit more in the market that you were already favoring. So I don't see any reason why it's suddenly on any of the relative or absolute reasons India sort of stands out in being unfairly targeted by foreign investors in any way.
Again, going back to the macro risk, Prashant, you have been you've taken big bets on commodities in the past, and you have been a bull on energy, power, oil, and so on. Do you see these supply disruptions and therefore the momentum in the stock markets as transient, or are these more permanent in nature and there is a trade out there that can be done through with a long-term perspective? And from a global macro perspective, on balance, would you think that is a bigger threat to markets than how you can actually play that part to benefit from it?
Thanks, Mahalakshmi. See, I think the unfortunately, I mean, I don't have a clear view on this. Whether it is the underinvestments in the energy space in the last 10 years, that is the reason. Is it a bunching together of demand or some supply bottlenecks because of COVID protocols? Or I guess it could be all of this, and which is leading to this supply challenges. And I really don't have a strong view which way things will pan out. But I think the core issue is how does inflation behave over the next few years? Because as everyone agrees, I think central banks have moved away from the earlier objective of price stability to supporting economic growth. I think their hand might get forced if inflation is persistent and it continues to surprise on the upside. But I think the answer to that will come over time. And as far as equities are concerned, I mean, uh, I think at least from an Indian perspective, the growth appears to be quite robust. After a long period of a weak profit cycle, we seem to be entering a strong profit cycle, and I think that is supportive of Indian markets. Interesting to note that the yields in India are have not fallen as much as they have fallen outside India, and that again I think works to our advantage. About global equities, to be honest, I have a very I am not the best person to be commenting, but globally, if you can see the market cap to GDP appear to be quite rich compared to the earlier averages, and globally the interest rates are at levels which have never been seen before. So I feel we are in a uncharted territory, and maybe, I mean, I would be keenly watching as to how things play out, but I don't have a very clear view on some of these issues.
Sure. Madhu, are the risks to India really global, or are there risks to India more India led?
So first of all, Mahalakshmi, happy Diwali to you and all my fellow panelists and to the entire team. I wish next coming years are as happy as they have been in the last 12, 18 months. Uh, I would say that first is on the global macro which you asked. So may I just add my two bits. Mahalakshmi, is very easy to have a discussion on these subjects, but to have a view and say that at some point of time these global macro hints, global macros will hurt us, and to sit in a sideline in a market like this is a very, very difficult task, whether you are a fund manager or whether you are an individual. So, and I have seen 25, 30 years in the market. Some of these macros, actually no one knows, including the American president or including the Federal Reserve chairman, watching the thing outside and telling what is the time. So I don't think it is in anyone's hands. So the only thing which we can do is follow them rather than predict them. And I have come to that camp. Whenever they will become visible risk, at that time, maybe the markets may not be at its peak, but we can't emotionally afford to sit in the sideline in the fear of any of this. Coming to India, I think as and when the markets will correct, the risk will be more coming from globally. Indian markets and Indian economy is, I have no doubt that we are in a really good cyclical uptrend. The government has done quite a lot in last 4 5 years, and everything is now converging, whether it is GST, whether it is insolvency bankruptcy law, whether it is the investment in infrastructure, recapitalization of public sector banks. Everything now is falling in place, and last 5 6 years have actually been dismal in terms of GDP growth rate or profit growth rates. So I am actually very positive on this cyclical upturn in the economy as a whole over the next few years. So I don't see much risk coming from India per se, but markets obviously will respect in the short term whatever happens globally.
Ramdevji, is that the biggest challenge that you face? You are a big, ardent follower of Buffett, and Buffett says inaction is the best thing when you are unsure about markets or they are peaking out. And on his parameters like GDP, market cap, we are at the top. So, is that the biggest challenge that you face today?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm listening to all of this, so I also get a little scared. But one thing which really is uh, I'm mindful is that in 80s, the U.S. interest rates were about 15, 17%, 20%, and that came down to literally 0 or 0.5%. And now, are we like a pendulum? Are we going to reverse? Reverse for sure, in the sense that not only that it's a transient, but are we into a permanently higher rate cycle as we go forward? But if you see the Fed chairman's statement and all the whatever you get to see, everybody is saying that inflation is dead forever, and whatever we get to see is all transient, and hence there is no risk. But if by chance rates were to really come up in a permanent way, so to 3, 4, 5%, and it keeps surprising quarter after quarter, I think there'll be good correction in the market, and correction is part of life. So I think equity investing is not threatened by this interest rate cycle. Yes, I mean, one should be ready for a good knock on the valuations. So that's what I would think. But I mean, running away from the market, getting to sit on the cash and all, that's not. I mean, ठीक है बात करने के लिए अच्छा है, but I don't think one can reach to any conclusion to do anything that drastic.
Sure. Sunil?
From time to time, there will be various factors which will keep on, hitting us, some positive, some negative. Over the last so many years, I think one thing which we have realized is that no single factor can impact the market for a fairly long period of time. So yes, interest rates and inflation and market cap to GDP and all are great indicators. They have worked from time to time in the past. But there has to be a culmination of a lot of factors to come together before we have a scary kind of a scenario. At this point of time, I think liquidity is available in plenty. I think my fellow panelists have talked about why no central bank can afford to cut on the liquidity very aggressively, and I think that is the view we share. If you see the indication coming in from 10-year GSEC yields, whether it is in India or US or elsewhere, I think they're all pointing to the fact that this range of 10-year yield is looking like continuing. We have had instances in Germany and Japan and so many other places where despite inflation and despite money printing, interest rates have remained at a lower level. So I think at this point of time, one has to be mindful of all these things. But just on the basis of one factor, you become negative and sell off everything. I think that is not a wise decision. And time and again we have seen that if you are a day trader, maybe you can take a call. But if you are investing for the future of the country and looking at what can happen over the next 4 or 5 years, I think this 5-7% risk of pull down should not impact your decision making.
Sure. So that's a question I wanted to ask, because all of you say bullish on India, right from Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, and I saw Ramesh also say bullish on India in one of the webinars last week. What does this bullish on India really mean? Because many a times this tends to convey to the common investor that you should never sell equities. You should never sell equities, however overvalued or undervalued they may be. What is the interpretation, and in the markets, what does bullish on India really mean? How do you play that?
To give you some context of what bullish on India means, I did a presentation for the CFA Society in which I tracked some of the most famous investors in India,
Right.
Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, R.K. Damani, Vinod Sethi, and Nimesh Shah. And one thing I've learned over 30 years from all of them is that they're always bullish on India. They believe that given the sweet demographic spot that India is in now, with 1.4 billion population, that any correction should inevitably lead to a buying opportunity, because democracy and incremental change is almost guaranteed in the Indian diaspora. So you remain invested. And for example, when I came to the market, when you started tracking me, Mahalakshmi, the index was in 1989 about 1,000, and now it's about 60,000. So if you remain invested in the index or in high quality stocks, you've done very well. And the one thing I've learned consistently, while there will be corrections and very sharp corrections in 92, 2008, 2019, if you remain bullish and optimistic about the future prospects of this country, I think you'll tend to do extraordinarily well. And I see no reason for that changing over the next 10 years or the next 20 years, because the forces that are driving this are still intact, in fact, more vibrant today than they were 20 years ago.
Would you agree to that, Devina?
Yeah, the data is not quite as simple as what Ramesh was saying. I mean, it is quite a bit up and down. So if you look at the 40-year history of the Sensex, the first decade we compounded at 21%, second decade at 14, then at 17, and then at 8.5. So 2010 to 2020, you would have been better off being in FDs than in equities. That's a 10-year period, not a 2, 3, 4-year period. So it's not short by any stretch of imagination. But I mean, the flip side to that is that 10 years of not so great performance created the room for this big up move that you have seen from the COVID lows. So even if now, if you look at it on a 12-year basis, we have compounded about 10.5%. So you are still well below the trend line. You're not above the trend line that you have you've been compounding at 25% or even 18%. That there's a case to be made that now we have to come back to the trend line. So that's the positive. Also, many of this kind of analysis that if you were in good quality stocks, you would have done well, suffers from survivorship bias, as Ramesh would well understand. Now, if you look at the original Sensex composition, for instance, you have the textile companies and the paper companies and the Premier Auto and all of that, which were not upstarts then. These were all companies with decades of history. In fact, the first Sensex list I could find only Indian hotels, which had a relatively short history. Everything else was really old, well-established companies from well-established Thapar Group and JK Group and all of that. But if you had invested in that basket, it would be a very different story. I mean, it's always good to say that if my father had bought Hindustan Lever or had bought HDFC Bank, I'd be sitting pretty. But actual survivorship bias-free baskets don't look like that. Let alone, I mean, actual baskets that I have seen. I had a client come and say, my mother hasn't looked at her portfolio for 20 years, and here it is, and that was the NEPC Mycons and the DSQ software and all that. So, but even letting go of that kind of outlier names, even the blue chips of the day don't always perform. So I would, as far as the investors are concerned, the formula is never so simple. But as I said, that the recent history, only positive takeaway is that there is still room. That a big bear market is unlikely because a big bull market has not taken place. Of course, there are areas of caution like this IPO frenzy, which can take things to very unrealistic levels. But that is a sidelight as of now.
Sure. So back to this question on India versus the rest of the world, and there are lots of points I want to ask basis what you said right now. But before that, all this while over the last 20 years, we have heard this decoupling story that, emerging markets at some point in time will start diverging from developed markets because the growth is here, the demographics are favorable, and therefore the equation should tilt in favor of emerging markets in India. And that's trade has not really worked out. I mean, we all now realize global equities, all of them go up and down, and directionally, I mean, there might be difference in the way they perform on a relative basis, but as an asset class, it stays the same. And Samir also brought this point that India is looked at as a separate entity. It's not even part of the emerging market basket. It's probably looked at like a China about 15 years ago or 20 years ago. Do you really see, and this question is really pertinent also because in the last 1.5 years, more so in since this year, India has been an outperformer by leaps and bounds. I mean, there is a huge difference between India and the next performer. Are we building in too much in terms of expectation? Do you think this can really sustain?
The first thing is that if we look at the Indian market in dollar terms for the last 20 odd years, it has beaten Warren Buffett in dollar terms. That is the market itself. But if we look at it, because this question we are asked from when we started Helios in 2005, the Indian market has underperformed the US market. And then somebody can say, well, why do I come here all the way? And our answer for that is that Indian active fund managers, good fund managers have beaten the market by 5-6% per annum, whereas the US good guys might have beaten it by 50 basis points per annum. And therefore, at the end of the day, the Indian guys only doing India have beaten the US market. But over the long term, Indian market has done a little better than the US, if you say 20 odd years. But the point is that this is more of it's not that the same guy is deciding. The logic is very simple. If you're managing a pension fund, and you have to somehow have your assets match the size of your liabilities, the only way you can do that is by investing in somewhat riskier markets and assume that you will make 12% per annum. Because in the US market, you can only assume 7-8% per annum based on history. So if you, for some part of the assets can say that this might grow at 12%, suddenly your expected assets match your expected or your frozen liabilities, and you don't have to fund the accounts anymore. Otherwise, as soon as you put that money in fixed income, as soon as you put that money in US market, your expected returns from the portfolio go down, which means you have a shortfall. So there will always be a market for a slightly higher risk and a slightly higher expected return. And in most cases, as long as it does better or even in line, nobody's going to feel so bad. We are not decoupled, I think. We learned that in 2008, where we thought we were decoupled and said we are not selling our HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank because they have not had any Lehman-related losses or subprime mortgages, and our stocks fell, twice the US rate. We can outperform, but we can't go against the trend of the world, I think. So therefore, we say we are a slightly higher beta, but we have actually in the last few years even had a disciplined beta also in that sense. But over the long term, we have done better than Buffett as an index. So forget about what Prashant and Madhu and all have done.
That is because Buffett has not done well. The fact is that
Buffett has beaten the US market or exactly in line
last
with the
10
market
years,
for
Buffett
the last
has
20 years.
underperformed.
No, he's underperformed by 1 or 2%. So that is not a big thing. But if that depends. If you make it 25 years and the sweet spot of the US market in the Clinton age and the 90s, then Indian market is underperformed. But broadly speaking, it has performed in line. And there have been much more room to outperform that market in India. That index, I mean. That is very clear from at least all these guys who are here on the screen. That you've had a much easier shot at beating that index in India than we would have had if we were managing US money.
Sure. Sunil, You bought Sherwin Williams. I'm sorry, I'm jumping the gun and asking this question. And you haven't bought Asian Paints. And you also wrote in your note 2-3 years ago about this, about the potential and how it doesn't make sense. Do you see more and more of those opportunities? Now I look at US stocks and I see, hey, Google, Apple, so many other stocks, Disney, all of them are available at 30 times earnings. And here you touch anything, even a small cap, mid cap would be as much that. So is the India opportunity really looking that good?
So first of all, on the earlier side, the fact that Indian markets are being compared to the US markets in itself is a big accomplishment for us. I think no other market, whether be it China, Brazil, or Russia, is being compared to US, and Indian market is being compared to US. That itself, I think, for an emerging market like India, is a great opportunity. On your question, I think at least I've been brought up the traditional way in terms of investing. And our way of investing is very clear. What you pay today should be more than made up by way of future profitability in whichever company you invest, whether the growth rate is high, low, whatever you call it. And I think the other thing is very clearly when I was studying and even on the CFA side, when I was in the board, one thing was very clear, that the best company is not necessarily the best stock. And I think that is why, this whole thing about what we've been saying of bubble inequality came about. So we admire all these great companies, but at this point, at these valuations, there are more than enough companies available in the world which are of a similar or a better kind of fundamentals in terms of growth, brand, return on equity, and so on and so forth, but yet trading at significant discount to what the Indian companies are trading at. And I would say that that's an opportunity for long-term investors like ourselves, because you have a scenario where people are buying not because they are fundamentally convinced about the stocks, but because of fear of missing out. And there are investors asking them, why don't you have Nestle or XYZ? And I was just talking to my colleague and he was telling me, sir, एक investor ने पूछा, आपके पास Nestle नहीं है, Asian Paint नहीं है, HDFC Bank नहीं है, Kotak नहीं है. So I told him, उसको जाके बोलो मेरे पास returns है. So I think that is what we focus on. So I think very clearly the best company is not necessarily the best stock, and that is a very simple philosophy we follow.
Compared to US equities and Indian equities, Ramesh, you said you were a convert from the American dream to the India bull story. I shouldn't say India bullish on India story, bullish on India story. Today, when you look at the global markets versus India, do you still feel bullish? I'm saying sheerly the way it has been discovered, the way you look at stocks and you look at these iconic companies and growth. Somehow the matrix looks like here we are attributing a lot because we are an emerging economy with the promise of higher growth. But there you have incredible, when you look at the micros, you have an incredible basket of stocks at far lesser valuations.
Mahalakshmi, what you're bullish on in America is the technology part and the disruption part that the innovative American economy brings in there. And that's not changing. Those businesses require very limited amount of capital and the huge displacement going on in that sector. What you're bullish about in India is the demographic story, not necessarily the disruption story. We have a huge middle class, aspiring middle class population that will drive growth for many years to come. So I think there's no reason to be bearish on one and bullish on the other. In fact, I'm bullish on the technology and disruption space in America and the demographic space in India.
So picking on one of the points that Devina made on, on the returns, decadal returns, we ran the same query since 1991 till now. And I did rolling returns for every year, for every period from 1 to 10 years. And we saw that for 2021, rolling return 10 years is averaging around 14%. And at the peak of 2008 and 2000, it was averaging in excess of 20%. So there is still a 6% annual gap to say that we are at the peak. But at the same time, when you look at the valuation story, it looked a little different. The dispersion in the P's of stocks in 2000 and 2008 was very different. It was really polarized. You had in 2008, you had the entire infrastructure basket, which was overvalued. You still could find a lot of other businesses which were sharply undervalued. Similarly, in 2000, there was huge overvaluation in a small pocket of stocks. It was led by technology and convergence plays and all of that. And the old economy was really in the dumps. Today, you see, barring the PSU basket, even that, of course, has run up in the past few months. Every sector, you don't see that kind of polarization or dispersion in valuation. How do we reconcile to this? Because this tells us that the entire market across sectors is sitting at elevated levels. So maybe I'll pose this question to Prashant, because he's done that trade beautifully, betting on polarity in the past.
So, Mahalakshmi, you are right. I mean, the markets in 2000 and 2008 were more deeply polarized, in the sense technology was very expensive and everything else other than technology was extremely cheap. And the same happened in 2007 as well. I think this time around, I mean, I think most sectors, I would say, are trading materially above 10-year averages. That's a very fair observation. The only thing is the weightage of these sectors, which are quite expensive. I think that weightages have somewhat moderated. And see, now we have a very large weightage for banking in India, which was not the case earlier. And banks, the way, I mean, the index heavyweight banks, they are outgrowing the economy, they are outgrowing the banking system, and they are not out of line with the longer term averages. And I think that is what creates a not such a negative outlook for the markets, because indeed, in terms of sectors, quite a few sectors are meaningfully above long term averages. So net, I feel that the outlook for India is one of the economic outlook, the profit growth outlook is quite robust. The markets outlook, I think, is optimistic, but it's not a great one. To my mind, it's a moderate one. It's a modest one. And let me point out, see, over time, growth, the impact of growth on returns is far more than the impact of multiples on returns. And I think that's where India is in a sweet spot, because see, a 12-14% growth in nominal GDP is a massive tailwind, even if the multiples are higher. Uh, and I think if you look at the components of the economy, whether it is private capex, whether it is infra capex, whether it is exports, consumption, the wage inflation, I think they all point towards good times for the economy. I mean, last year, if you see all the entire manufacturing piece, paper, sugar, textiles, chemicals, metals, power, everything, chemicals, everything has done well. So I think private capex is also around the corner. The government is firmly focused on infra capex. Exports are doing well. India has certainly gained competitiveness over China in manufacturing in a number of industries. The buyers want to de-risk given the experience of last year. So net, I feel equity should outperform bonds, but given the valuations, given the very large supply of new stocks, I would say it is time to moderate expectations. But I would not make a case that one should move out of equities.
Ramdev, you say that in markets, the only thing you can control is the purchase price. And of course, everybody says that, but you say it more often and you've also practiced it. Now, in this market, how do you find purchase prices? Are you still able to see value where you see that, okay, active fund management can really yield very strong alpha?
Yeah, see, alpha creation is becoming difficult for sure, but finding the stocks, what you like, what is your parameter for valuation, that is not that difficult, in the sense that you can definitely allocate at reasonably priced stock. There are stocks which are very expensive, but adjusted for growth, one of the things which we are missing out in India's story is that India, what we call it, India, the next trillion-dollar opportunity. This happens in a country's history once in a lifetime. We are at about $3 trillion. Our per capita GDP is about $2,000 per capita. What happens is when you go from 3 to 6, the per capita consumption, particularly of the discretionaries, they go 5x, 7x, 10x. Doubling of GDP is multiple times more consumption for a lot of discretionary categories. And underlying companies, at times the company owner himself doesn't know that the growth could be so big. So now one of the bet is that India not only this year grows at about 9-10%, but after that also 7-8% growth, 8% growth is possible. It is definitely possible. Whether the authorities they deliver it, the policies are conducive or not, that only time will tell.
Madhu, you are again a person who has bought JSW Steel at the levels that you bought in 2000. I mean, you've looked at those kind of prices and then you look at prices and the way they get discounted in markets these days. First of all, do you see value? What kind of opportunities do you see for Alpha? And where, more importantly?
I have the advantage of listening to everyone. So let me respond first to your question of being bullish on India. So we have seen a lot of the people who have done really well in India, as Rameshji was saying, whether it's R.K. Damani or whether it's Rakesh Jhunjhunwala, Nimesh Bhai and others. Bullish on India to me means, Mahalakshmi, that can you really still find opportunities to make money in sectors and companies? And I don't think there is any dearth of those opportunities. There will be time to time where market will be slightly undervalued and our portfolios will go consolidation or we might lose. But I am quite excited that we still can find opportunities. The other point which you are alluding to, one is that, always you can't take historical valuation as a yardstick to measure, because we don't know if you're talking about 2002-3 type of valuation. At that time, maybe interest rate was 12%. Today, interest rate is 6%. So you can't strictly compare these things. Thirdly, the most important point which I want to say, that Prashant said, that your expectation has to be moderated. But this is not a euphoric market across the board. There might be euphoria in pockets of market, but you can't argue that there is euphoria in metal companies. They're still trading at 3-4 times EV/EBITDA. PSUs are still trading at like 7,000 or 6,000 Nifty. Power companies are still trading at 15-year low. But from where they were, they have not yet crossed. And there has been such massive period of consolidation and underperformance in lot of economy-linked companies. We are nowhere near euphoric prices or euphoric levels. So I would still say that yes, Nifty has gone up from 7,500 to 18,000 in a barometer manner. So your risk of coming today and investing is far higher than what it was at 7,500. But I, for one, I'm very excited. I can still find a lot of opportunities in this market where I'm bullish.
Sunil, where are you finding your 10 baggers? Or are there any 10 baggers?
I don't know why we are obsessed with finding multi-baggers or 10 baggers. I think if we keep on compounding the way we have compounded over a period of time, even funds become multi-baggers, which has been proven by so many funds, including our erstwhile growth fund and so on and so forth. But I agree completely with Madhu that, the markets might be overvalued, undervalued from time to time. Even at this point of time, we can say for sure that they are not cheap, but they are definitely not in a euphoric kind of a thing. And at the same time, the good thing about India is that we are a country which is very diversified. We have presence across sectors. So we are in manufacturing, we are in auto, we are in new age businesses, and now entrepreneurship and digital economy is also taking shape. And we have the fortune, or I would say good fortune, of having so many listed companies. So every day you have new ideas floating around and so on and so forth. I think the fact of the matter is that whenever you are investing, you have to invest with a perspective in mind. As I said, whether what you're paying today will be more than made up by way of future profitability. And if you take that into account, there are a lot of boring businesses which are looking very exciting. And the more boring the businesses are, the more returns they make ultimately. The more exciting the business appears, the more is the risk of losing money. So I think there are a lot of boring businesses. I would completely agree. Metals are in that one place where balance sheets have been repaired quite significantly. Most of these metal companies are now in a sweet spot where they will not have any debt. And imagine such large companies generating such large cash flows, having debt-free balance sheets, and there is still no technology which is going to replace usage of steel or copper or so on and so forth. I think financials are again one place where they underwent a lot of cleaning up last one decade. They're coming out of it, particularly the so-called corporate banks. And from here on, interest rates are low. Credit cycle is picking up. Retail credit is now much more acceptable. We are not only borrowing to buy a house, but now even you can borrow you can buy your electronics and so many other consumption items on loan. So that is an exciting space. Also, India has world-class infrastructure and I would say capability in IT and other knowledge-based industries like pharma. Again, there are huge opportunities. So, if you just remove the so-called fashion stocks or the momentum stocks or the new age stocks, which the only research report is that buy it, otherwise someone else will buy it. Other than that, I think there are a lot of opportunities.
If I may
Sorry.
just add, you look far more cautious than I've ever seen you. A headline number को देख के घबराना नहीं है. If you dig deeper, you will still find a lot of opportunities. Trust me.
Sure. So there has been value in the market for a long time. I mean, for example, all the stocks that Prashant has picked have been value picks for some time, but for some reason there are pockets that the market still doesn't seem to be very convinced about. So Prashant, does your trade work for the next 1 year or so? The PSU basket, the metal basket, a lot of stocks with sturdy businesses which have looked cheap now look less cheap, but continue to look cheap nevertheless.
Well, actually, I mean, I clearly feel that if a business is sustainable, it is growing, and if it does not perform, it's not a reason to lose hope. And in the end, I mean, things come back to where they ought to be, and I think we have seen that happen in corporate banks. And even Samir in his last interview said that at least one state bank he would buy, others he would still not buy. I hope a day comes when he says he's become a little more generous and he says, okay, maybe I'll consider a few others. But so I think there is, there are public companies that are not good and that are good, and that is true for private companies as well. And I think that the whole debate has been very one-sided, because if you look at the value destruction, it has happened far more, or maybe to a large extent, in the private sector as well. I mean, what happened to many private banks, many private NBFCs, many private power companies, so which have not just the market caps, but even the businesses have come to a lot of pain. So I think there are good and bad companies in public and private sector, and if you are in select businesses, I think public companies are quite competitive, sustainable, and I think over time we should find better price discovery. It has happened to an extent in some of the banks. It has happened to some extent, I think, in the oil companies. But I think in some other areas it remains, and it will be interesting to see how the current year pans out.
So, Ramesh, you've again been, you have bet on public sector companies hugely in the past and benefited from it. So, now how do you feel about, there is obviously a lot more optimism about PSU stocks now, because there is talk of this investment program becoming a reality in a big way, that the government will really push through all of this. So what's your take now on prices and valuations in that pocket? And the second question I want to pose, related question to Samir Good. Prashant reminded me that he says he wants to buy SBI is on his, in fact, he owns SBI now, I think. And I also saw that on his wish list, things that he would wish to buy now are Container Corporation and one or two other PSU names. Now I can't recollect. So what does it tell me about the rest of the market when Samir, who says that I will never touch a government company, is willing to buy a PSU? So I'll come to that later, but first, Ramesh.
Yeah, thanks, Mahalakshmi. First, I'd like to endorse whatever Prashant said. I think there are good companies and bad companies. I don't, as a value investor, how can you not look through the balance sheets and decide if the company is trading at a fraction of its value or it's trading at exorbitant multiple? I mean, that's my job. What is the intrinsic value of the business that I'm owning? Having said that, we have to decide whether some companies value or value trap. And I would just submit two things to your audience's view. The first thing is that previously, when the oil companies would raise petrol prices by 1 rupee, there would be dharnas at the petrol station. Mamata Banerjee would boycott parliament. Now we privatized Air India. I didn't hear a whiff of complaint anywhere. Secondly, so the government has shown that it has the ability to make the hard decisions. Secondly, look what happened to the IRCTC. They did something that was detrimental to minority shareholders. They did something that didn't protect their interests. Within 12 hours, the market forced them to change it. I don't think this will do it again. They made that mistake, it was rectified, and the markets moved on. So, my sense is that people who are so adamantly saying, I will never look at PSUs again, I think they're missing the boat. I think there is some value there. There are good companies and bad companies, and there are great opportunities. And I think if you want to be a contrarian investor or you want to have alpha, as Ramdev says, it's hard not to look at those stocks. I mean, some of these valuations in these stocks for excellent companies, in my view, are brain dead. So I would definitely urge everyone to look at them.
Mahalakshmi, if I may just add one before you, because of late I've also been very bullish on the public sector companies and the banks. So when Ramesh says there are good companies and bad companies, in the markets we have seen, there are flexible investors and there are adamant investors. And markets have always rewarded the flexible investors. So anyone who says that I will never do this, we have seen that has never been the best way to approach markets.
Sameer, you're choosing PSUs is a reflection of how valuations are in the rest of the market, or you are more amenable, benevolent, flexible?
That is just a way to dramatize your view. We own State Bank since June last year and Container Corporation maybe since December. But the point is that actually philosophically, I can argue with everybody and say that if you look at a PSU and you think it is 5p, actually it is 10p. How I say that, let me share with you, is that if you look at Tata Motor DVR, only because it does not have voting rights, for whatever reason, the market chooses to give it, say, half the valuation of the voted share. And I think the PSUs that we have are all effectively non-voting shares. Therefore, the theoretical valuation of the correct share is twice the valuation that you see in the market. But the point is, I totally agree with Madhu that you have to be flexible. You say, for example, we say we don't like high valuations of companies. We don't want 80 and 90 Ps, but we own Titan and we own maybe Jubilant. So the point is, everything you say up to a point and then you leave it. And in that sense, yes, I would not buy PSUs because I don't think when I'm owning a PSU, I for even 1 minute feel that I'm an owner of that company, because half the valuation of a company does not come from present value of future dividends. It comes from the ability to do M&A, ability to fire, ability to sell a company, do a joint venture, do a private equity transaction. If you look at all the companies, say 50 years ago, and you know the actual dividends that you received for the 50 years, and that day you go back and say, was it the present value of the future dividends? It was not. 30-40% is these things that you do, and none of them you can do with PSUs. But if a particular PSU they say is going to be privatized or has something cheap, yeah, please go ahead, like I think for Container Corp. But otherwise, I philosophically disagree that those are companies beyond a point.
Ramdevji, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Madhu said, that you don't have to be adamant investor, you have to be flexible. In this market, particularly if you're managing public money, you have to be, you can be adamant investor if you're a private money guy. I mean, nobody's asking you anything. But if you want to be in that, outperformance game in a particular measured, timeline, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, obviously you have to be a little more flexible. And I don't think there is a taboo that you must not buy public sector companies, because there are a lot of monopolies out there. They're gigantic in size, and they have created values and they can create value. And particularly in relative terms, if everything else has moved up by 2x or 3x, and that segment is available at half X, clearly there is a value added will catch up. When people underperform by 2, 3%, 4% to the peer in private sector, but still, if the value gap is too much, you must exercise that opportunity to encash on that particular gap.
I want to ask one question on autos because this really baffles me. And there are a lot of businesses that are getting disrupted, and auto and power, particularly, are really at the center of this sort of disruption. And I think I will ask this question to both Sunil and Ramdev, because you believe in brands, and especially Ramdev, because you are a big follower of Buffett, and the whole idea of moats and brands are very significant. And Munger and Buffett always expounded on this fact that uh, a brand is not only about a product or technology or any of those things. It is about brand experience. And suddenly we are looking at a market which is treating Bajaj Auto or Hero, all these companies as also RANs. And these are companies that have created brands and experiences that have lasted for a long, long time and created high ROEs. Why do we think that a new company like Ola or anybody who is a first mover could come and dislodge them, and they will not be able to replicate their success so far in the new game?
In my view, one of the biggest value migration any sector is going to see in next 10, 15, 20 years is going to be the automotive sector. And this is going to be transition from IC engines to electric vehicles. But it is not going to happen overnight. And it's not necessary that only new companies will be able to do it. So there is a Tesla, which is a completely, they don't have any legacy. They are completely EV company. So today, their market cap of Tesla is equivalent to all the auto companies listed in US or maybe many parts of the world. So that's the hope that they are innovators and they'll be able to get disproportionate share of the market and disproportionate share of the profits. That's what is going to be the game as far as US markets are concerned. And that's why and Tesla has been given that. I would rightly think so, maybe a little excessive, but clearly I'm of the thinking that what is happening in the US market is right in terms of Tesla valuation. People think that in India also the same thing is going to happen. And but here we don't have any innovator. There is no disruptor to the current demand, and the innovation now has not reached to a level of our demographics in the sense that our $4,000-5,000 car or our $1,000 motorcycles, they are not electrified or the models are not there, and hence when the market opens up, when the semiconductor problems are over, I hope we have the normal economy in next 6 months or 1 year. You are going to see that EV will come. Maybe it is a little away, but the growth in profits will happen to the existing companies because no more new companies are going to come up. But people are not going to wait for the EV to come or affordable EV to come. So what is going to happen is the growth is going to come to Maruti or Hero or Bajaj or Eicher Motor. There are 4-5 players. All of them will grow. They'll make money. I don't know how the P multiples will be imparted. One missing part is we don't know how the markets will impart the P multiples to the company. They will have high ROE, high cash flow. In fact, they will also reinvest into EV. And some of the companies like Bajaj and all, TVS and all, they are very aggressive. Telco is very aggressive on the EV side. So my sense is that the next transition is also going to be done by these companies only. So the future of the automotive it belongs to them only as the things stand today. And hence there is no reason why market should be very pessimistic as things normalizes.
Sure. Sunil?
We have been almost zero weight to auto for a long period of time. But as Mukul said, we are always open to revisit. I think if you go back in history, there is always a fear from the existing players to introduce something which might disrupt their own business. It happened with Kodak, and it was Canon and Nikon which came out with a digital camera. I think the same thing is happening with our auto companies. What Ola is doing or what Ather is doing or what some other two-wheeler EV companies are doing, that should have been done by the likes of the existing companies. In fact, Hero went ahead and gave the rights of the EV vehicle to one of their cousins. And now they are fighting of who owns the brand. So I think somewhere there is always this resistance of launching something which can disrupt in the near term your own business. And I think that is what we are seeing. There is a little bit of apprehension from the existing automakers to launch something which can be something new. The other thing is, which Ramdev Bhai touched upon, their profits might continue. It might be a long haul, but markets are very smart. They start to discount the future. And therefore, it is possible that they might turn out to be deep value plays, which might be treated like utilities, where there is a view of 8-10 years of profit, and after that there's a question mark. So unless some auto company comes and completely disrupts, what is Bajaj doing? They've launched a Chetak in an EV form. Now Chetak used to not sell for the last 5-10 years. I don't know who has bought Chetak. I'm just giving you a perspective. They're great entrepreneurs. Rajiv Bajaj, hats off to him for what he has done. But I think all their attempts have been half-hearted. So I think it's going to be a space where we have to watch, very carefully. As far as the four-wheeler market is concerned, I think the buyers now want new stuff. No one wants to buy the same old models. You need to completely keep on redeveloping your products, and I think that is where you are seeing the market share being lost by the market leader as far as India is concerned. So I think it's challenging times ahead, and this is a space which is not an easy sort of a buy.
Can I just add one thing on this EV thing?
Yeah.
See, if you look at other markets like China, there are more than 200 companies which are manufacturing electric vehicles. I repeat, there are more than 200 companies. Because beyond a point, if you're not manufacturing batteries and the control system, then you are essentially assembling it. And in India, I don't see anyone who is very large actually innovating on battery or they're investing those billions of dollars which are required. So I personally do not feel that these incumbents who have been there, whether it is Bajaj or Hero Honda or anyone who was very dominant in India, will continue their dominance in the electric vehicle space, because you don't require that kind of brand because it's proven in China. If you go through the history, and China clearly has been at least 5-10 years ahead of us when it comes to electrical vehicles. So I think there will be a lot of disruptions, and I for one believe there will be new players who will come and challenge some of these old companies.
Devina, what does the global experience show? Our managements is because the managements are in denial and therefore value will be destroyed?
I don't think it's quite so simple. I mean, first of all, let me agree with what Madhu was saying, that in the markets you have to be flexible. You can't be wedded to the ideas. And also what Sunil was saying, that often money is to be made not when a company goes really from good to great, but when it goes from terrible to less bad. So, you don't have to buy the best companies in that sense to make the most money. Coming to this specific question, see, Tesla also had a big head start, but the point is that they did not get their production together for a very long time. And that gave years and years to the incumbents who were no doubt slow off, but then they caught up. And which is why some of the products that have been introduced by the legacy car makers have actually done very well, including those from, so-called no-hopers like Ford. So that is one part of the story. As far as India is concerned, I don't see, dynamic companies as these companies have been. These have not been the Kodak kind of companies who have refused to disrupt their business model. I mean, Bajaj Auto is a case study of how they have disrupted their model many times, whether it was exports, whether it was giving up scooters. So again, often incumbents are a little late in the game, but I don't think, it is that they are going to leave the whole field wide open for only the newcomers to make gains. That's not going to happen. I'm sure they will get their act together, are in the process of getting their act together.
Prashant, do you seek value in this space?
So Mahalakshmi, one, I think the EVs will come pretty fast, because if you look at the what the government policy is. I mean, the price of a Nexon, I think, is virtually the same as that of a Brezza on road, because the taxation on ICE vehicles is much higher in India, and the very high prices on fuel also make a big difference. So I think price parity in some sense is here. I don't think we have to wait for a long time. Second, I think the consumer psyche is such that he is not making up an Excel spreadsheet and looking at the total cost of ownership over 10 years. He says this is the upfront cost, but this is my monthly bill, and the saving on EVs is pretty significant. So I think EVs are also, I think, uh, more appealing to the younger generation because they are more like gadgets, feature rich. So I think EVs should come in pretty fast, both in the two-wheeler space and the four-wheeler space. I think I have a, I mean, while multiples can correct, but I also feel the profit pool will reduce pretty significant. I mean, in the foreseeable future, because when you start seeing a shift towards EVs, the pricing of current vehicles could come under pressure, and competition could get more intense, and your ability to hike prices. I mean, if you look at last few decades, two-wheeler, four-wheeler prices go up by 2-4% a year. I think that could also come at risk. So I would be slightly cautious in that space, and I think the incumbent companies have to move pretty fast to be able to do a good job. And while I mean, as Madhu said, in China there might be 200 companies, but this is a fairly high involvement product. So I would feel that a good product coming from a good company, I think there should be, the market share should not be very, very fragmented. I somehow don't feel that's the right way to look at it. I think coming to the power space, it's a fundamentally very different space, and I mean everyone takes a very 30,000 kind of feet view, and I think there are few facts which need to be taken note of. One, India's power demand is set to grow extremely rapidly, as Ramdev ji said, 3 trillion going to 6 trillion or 4 trillion. I mean, what is discretionary purchasing all about? I mean, there is hardly anything which is not energy intensive nowadays. So I think power demand in India will accelerate. The moment you add an air conditioner to a house, the power consumption of that house more than doubles. So I think power is a growth sector in India, and I am sure we know that how the power demand has behaved this year compared to where it was 2 years back, not last year. So I think power is a growth sector in India. And unlike EVs, I mean, the power companies can move very easily to solar power. I mean, a thermal power plant or a hydro plant is far, probably 1,000 times more complex than putting up a solar power plant. So, what prevents incumbent company to move to wind or to solar? After all, I mean, the only thing that matters in solar or wind is the cost of borrowing, and you have to do a, I mean, half a minute survey in the bond markets as to who are the cheapest borrowers. And finally, the second point, which I have been saying for a long time, is in India the power demand peaks on a daily basis in the mornings and in the evenings between 5 to 9. So right now the power demand should be peaking for today in the country, and at this time solar energy is not available, and storage is still about 7, 8, 10 rupees per unit. So who is going to pay for that power? Who is willing to pay for that power? So I think it will be a while before this switch takes place. It's a great shift, a switch shift. It will take place, but I think it will be more gradual. Number one, and number two, I think the incumbents have a very good chance of playing a very meaningful role in the renewable forms of power as well.
Sure. So Samir, this question is to you. Why NTPC is the HDFC Bank of the power space? Why is it not on your wish list?
Okay, I will think about it later, but let me talk about auto sector because that is my favorite shot for the last 1.5 years. So the big picture is that nobody is saying that when you have electric vehicles, that there'll be more cars sold than before. So let us say there were X number of manufacturers of cars for the last whatever 20 years. And now you have all of them having to switch to electric vehicles. And even if there was no outsider coming in, all you would do is spend so much money and let's say hope that you retain the share that you had before. But now you have some 50 new guys like Tesla also coming into the same market where whatever was the growth before will be the growth more or less, because I don't think anybody's saying that as you move from IC to electric vehicle, the number of car sales will go up disproportionate to whatever was the normal growth. So in an industry which had X number of players, now you'll have X plus some 50, 100, and if you say China 200, all of them trying to come in because the new guys have an angle which they did not have before. So at the end of the day, maybe one of the existing guys' new car is better, and therefore he also wins market share. But today, by just looking at the amount of money being invested from our big companies celebrating a $1 billion investment to General Motors and Volkswagen and Ford saying $35 billion to develop their EV cars, there is no hope, I think, in this sector.
So the last question on the most happening sector, and everybody is curious to know how the story is going to end, which is the digital internet businesses space. And again, I see from data people like Prashant, who's like a supremely value conscious investor, has got a pre-IPO allotment in Nykaa. And earlier we used to talk about P being the barometer. Then it moved to, we would talk about price to sales when it suited us. We went to PEG, then EV by EBITDA. Now it is EV by sales and EV by sales for FY27. So the valuation metrics are just moving based on what is required to sell the story. And I see even someone like Prashant is a participant here. So let me pose this question to Prashant. What makes you optimistic? What is your play? How do you really look at this space?
So Mahalakshmi, I have invested in consumer companies. I have invested in technology companies in mid-90s. I have invested in pharmaceuticals. So, I mean, value conscious does not mean that you will not participate in companies that are at high multiples or that offer higher growth. It just means that when the multiples are not able to justify one's view of the future growth, you will stay away from that. Like today, I don't own any consumer companies. So as far as coming to this new age companies is concerned, I think there are some extremely good companies in that. And there are some companies where the future outlook is not that clear, at least to my mind. And companies that have a good business model, I think we participate. And I agree with you that valuations are not cheap in this space. And but it does not mean that you have to buy and hold these companies for 10 years. I mean, there is a certain this is a phase of the market. These are rapidly growing companies, and I think if you see an opportunity to generate some returns, as Ramdevji said, generating alpha is becoming very difficult. So to the extent we think it is doable, we do participate in this space as well.
This is a vote for flexibility. So
no, Mahalakshmi, I think, see, there are certain principles. I mean, you will not, I mean, it all depends. But yes, I mean, there are certain things I would not feel comfortable doing. And, many businesses where we have not participated, even if they went up 50x, 100x, 1000x, because we've realized the core itself is extremely questionable. But where the core is good, and I may take a certain view of growth, it may turn out to be a lot better. And you also have to be mindful as to how, I mean, there are very few, the first mover in any space has significant advantages, and how the markets are going to look at it, at least in the short term. I think that is also an important consideration that people like me need to keep in mind. And of course, these are all done while, I mean, we take these names, but when you look at the percentages in the portfolios, I think that is extremely small, and that will give you a more balanced view of one's thinking in that space.
Manish, in 1993-94, you bought some of these high-tech companies into the market. I mean, they were in a similar phase of huge growth, but they were also had cash flows and all of that. And in 2000, everybody learned the lesson that however great the company may be, however good the growth prospects may be, in the end, if the stock price is overvalued, you will go down. So today, when you look at these companies, which definitely tell us that there is going to be, the leadership is already established, they'll have network effect and all of that thing. Do you see these will end up as disappointments from a stock market perspective?
So I'll say a couple of things because I've been listening quietly for the last half an hour. That number one, you keep worrying about like you said, the phase of the market because interest rates are so low. It's natural that valuations are going to be high. And as a bull market evolves, what happens is you start getting sector rotation and you keep getting these intermediate corrections where you get stocks which you can buy from different times in that cycle, which is what is happening now. Also, rates are not going to be as low as they are today, and therefore the overall level of valuation has to be balanced with whatever is the earning growth, because eventually that's the rate of profit which will see you through. If you go ahead from there and you say, when there are corrections, you will get buying opportunities somewhere, you also have the fear of disruption at the other end in the terminal value of these companies. For example, as you discussed autos right now, the same logic I remember were discarding Indian IT service companies few years ago, thinking that AI will come, automation will come, robotics will come, and all these guys will be out of a job. And these very same companies have gone from a 13 multiple, 1.3, to a 30 multiple, 3.0, or excess of that. I think similar things are happening across different sectors. Like a lot of us love banks and financial services. There is fintech disruption happening there. And a lot of these banks, or the likes of people like Bajaj Finance or the private sector banks, or even SBI for that matter, are taking in this fintech very, very rapidly and changing as they speak. I think similar things will happen across sectors in autos and so on as well. Because don't forget, 50% of India's manufacturing sector is really automobiles. And they have the engineering skills and ability to scale. And despite all the hype of Tesla, it still doesn't produce in terms of a car the quality that you would want. It's a great engine, it's a great software, all that is great. But my bet is still eventually it may be the Nissans or the BMWs or the Volkswagens who will come and eventually bring that engine and that storage in and probably still win that battle. I take Ramdev's point on profit pool shifting, but it's not a given that the disruptor comes and wins. Coming to this last point of these tech companies, it's also the case in India. We are not tech companies, we are tech enabled companies. There's no underlying tech. Like today, if Zomato comes in my mind, it's no different from Indigo and SpiceJet. It's funded well today. It's delivering a passenger from X to Y. Tomorrow, if another guy comes in that locality and starts providing services cheaper, I'm concerned with the 50 restaurants in my locality. I don't care what he's doing elsewhere in the country. So a lot of these things will change. And it is, like I said, the nature of market. Some sectors will get overpriced. Typically, an IPO is an auction process where prices are set by people who come in. Like you're asking today about, these tech IPOs. Prashant spoke earlier about, what was happening to power and infrastructure in 2008, real estate in 2008. I myself was a banker in those days. I used to be surprised at the caliber of investors who were coming in the book. Because like you said, everyone needs to do a trade and make that alpha. There's no convinced holder in a lot of these companies. So it's a phase of the market. I would not generalize that all IPOs are bad or all of these new disruptive internet-enabled companies are bad or good. You have to, like I said, you have to make money bottom up. If you don't understand the business, there's valuation, there is earning growth, and there's time horizon. If you don't have these three things clear in your head and you're buying something, you're going to get into trouble. And if you're okay with it, no one says the time horizon of someone who's buying one of these companies, and if they can look out 5, 10, 7 years, and they think conditions and execution is going to be perfect, by all means, the valuations may hold. Who are we to argue? Like we used to argue that Nestle or Lever cannot hold a 60, 70, 80 multiple. It's held it and it's only appreciated over time. That doesn't make them wrong. So I would just leave it at that please just do what you understand on valuation, earnings, and time horizon. That's all I'd like to submit here.
Samir, you call these companies, you said these companies remind you of the South Extension juice wala.
No, I was not saying about the company. I was saying about the process. So
About
the
the
process
IPO,
is that
IPO process.
we are not making this much money and we don't like these because we are coming in very late into the process. That's the whole thing. Otherwise, they would have been okay at the prices if somebody's bought them. But I keep reminding everybody that does not mean that the private equity fund guys are doing much better. Is that their visible successes we see, and we don't see all their flops. So in the end, it's better to be in public markets. But yeah, here the IPO and then the post-IPO price. From post-IPO, if you see even Zomato, it's up like 3-4% maybe if you take 125 as their post-IPO price. So I was talking that post-IPO, it's been squeezed a few times already.
Sure. So that pretty much brings us to the end of this discussion. So as a final note, I want everyone to place one high conviction bet. But before we do that, I'm going to pose some questions where you can say whether you are for it or against it. Sensex will cross 75,000 by next Diwali. Who's betting for it?
That means 25%.
25%, yeah.
Not betting. We should do thumbs up, thumbs down or something. Then everybody, you can see everybody together.
Yeah, you could do that. Everybody thumbs down. Madhu,
I think
are you a
everyone is
contrarian in this regard?
because everyone is thumbs down, I would raise my hand.
Okay, whatever.
Sunil, thumbs up. Prashant?
I think it's hard
No,
to say.
you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to
No,
do
no
that. Thumbs up or
explanation.
down.
Lakshmi, they are managing public money. Be kind. It will be up by more than 10%. Let's just agree on that.
I think
What do we
75
mean by
looks
this?
difficult.
It makes no sense.
75 looks difficult.
Yeah.
In one
We'll
year.
take it if we get it.
You'll make more than FD.
Okay, Indian markets will be a relative outperformer this year by next Diwali.
Compared to who?
Relative to whom?
MSCI emerging markets.
Yes.
Possible.
Thumbs up. Thumbs up. All right.
I'm not so sure, Mahalakshmi, because it depends on how China behaves. That's a large weight and it has underperformed a bit. So I'm not so sure on that.
Okay. Ramdev ji,
Yeah, I think we'll beat.
thumbs up.
He's always thumbs up.
Yeah, thumbs up.
Okay. Rupee will cross 80 by next Diwali. Nobody.
18.
Prashant?
No, I think, it should not cross 80 tomorrow. I don't think.
All right. Will be higher than present levels.
What?
It means
Rupee will be
depreciation.
high, will appreciate from here on by next year.
Oh, appreciate from here on.
Appreciate.
No.
I'm the only bull on that. I think
Petrol
the
will be
rupee
one-
deserves to be 60. I'm the only bull on that.
Not
These
deserve.
guys are printing trillions of dollars and we fools are depreciating and buying these assets. We
So
must
you're
agree.
betting it will appreciate this year?
I'm always betting that the rupee has to go up in my lifetime massively. And that's only when this consumption basket of India will explode. Otherwise, we'll keep selling 3 million cars and praying to China to come and, create a market here.
But it's
We have
because
to
of this
appreciate it.
consumption that it is depreciating. Because we
Yeah.
import everything from China
Exactly.
or wherever else.
That's when we'll create scale to manufacture also. But anyway, let's go ahead.
Okay. Petrol will be 150 by next year. No. Okay, that's a resounding no.
You mean $150 or 150 rupees at the pump?
So far, rupees. Okay, 10-year will be 7% by Diwali. Next Diwali.
Could be.
7%.
10-year yield.
10 year
Could be.
10 year could be. I'm like
Could
here.
be. Could be.
Somewhere between here and here.
Who knows?
Okay, cool. So now time for your high conviction bets. Madhu, can we start with you?
I would say rather than putting one sector or a company, companies which are actually benefiting out of cyclical upturn in the economy, which includes a lot of value sectors, whether it is public sector banks, whether it is real estate, whether it is infrastructure companies. So I would look to buy the best from that lot.
Can you say something quantifiable?
No.
Bet on
I
something quantifiable. Let's say Tata Steel. For that matter, anything else.
it's not fair to discuss a stock specific. I don't do that, Malakshmi. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Ramdevji?
Yeah, I think credit cost cycle will reverse. Otherwise, there is no story here. So I'm very confident that in next 4 quarters to 8 quarters, we'll see vicious recovery in the bad debts of the banks, and it includes public as well as private sector banks.
Okay. Prashant?
Alex do very well in India. That's what I
Sorry?
feel it should. The manufacturing sector should do quite well. I am not so sure, as I said earlier, about the automobile sector. I don't look upon it as a manufacturing sector, but I think the otherwise manufacturing sector should do quite well, especially probably linked to capital goods.
So capital goods will outperform the index by next Diwali.
I think
That
yes.
would be your bet?
Yes, I think manufacturing in India is coming of age. There are various tailwinds that we have. That's a space I think I am quite positive on this.
Sure. Manish?
I'm a perennial bull on financials. I think they've cleaned up over the last 7-8 years. Their cycle is here, and especially if financials, and second I would say these privatization candidates, because like Ramesh, we've had great experience over there as well in the past. So 2, not just 1.
Sure. Ramesh?
Sure. I'll give 2 also, like Manish. I think one will, of course, be select PSU stocks. I think they're streaming by. The other, I think, some IPL cricket team. I think the media rights are going to go for a very big amount, and I think the valuations will surprise a lot of people.
Sure. So you would bet the PSU index will outperform by next year? The Nifty?
Like Prashant said, good stocks, bad stocks. I have my own basket of PSU, so I'm not very conversant with the PSU index per se.
Sure, sure. So
None of us are buying PSU index, Malakshmi, as yet.
Right.
If we start buying the PSU index, then you can make a case. The market is really, really running out of ideas.
True that, true that. Sudhir?
So, I would agree with what Manish said. The largest so-called corporate bank and the largest PSU corporate bank, I think both of them should give phenomenal returns from there on. And significantly outperform the so-called blue chip private sector banks.
Sure. Samir?
I think some of these high PE consumer companies will underperform the index by more than 10% like they've done this year.
Okay. Davina?
Well, one bet which has run for a while, which is the IT services and other tech, which we've liked for over a year, I think that will still continue. And one, what is contrarian for me, because this business I have never liked, which is financials. I think, and if you look at 2020, that was the only index that was down for the year. This year also, the Nifty Bank has underperformed, and especially the NSE 500. I think this year in Diwali to Diwali, there is likely to be some re-rating. There, especially as the rates go up, it's good for the lenders because the assets get repriced faster than the liabilities. So that is a change in stance from me.
I have one more.
Financials are looking better than they have for a while.
I have one more that some of the fintechs will blow up before they go public.
Sure.
Yes, that I would agree too.
Okay,
That
let's
is
do thumbs up, thumbs
the
down on
private
that.
equity, what you said, the props don't make it to the headlines. So that would be part
No,
of
but
that.
let's say thumbs up or thumbs down on many fintechs, or some fintechs will
Fintechs
blow
will
up before they go
blow up.
public. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Fintech will go up.
Oh,
Yes,
Madhu
I
is
agree.
doing thumbs down.
Bro.
Yeah.
No. I think I agree with Samir. What I was saying, I
Modi
was
is getting back the
okay.
money.
Okay.
And on the IPOs, I must quote Samir from one of the earlier IPO frenzies, a quote which I have used often, that we are not investing in the company, we are investing in the IPO process.
In the process, yeah.
I always remember this quote of Samir every time the IPO market heats up.
We could do collectively. The IPO index will underperform.
From listing day for sure. From listing day
Absolutely.
for sure. Yeah.
And that's a global experience
Yeah, that is
also.
very
Uber,
easy
Lyft,
one.
DoorDash, everything, not just underperforms, often falls from the IPO listing.
Sure. In one word, please describe your sentiment towards the market for the next 1 year. We can go in reverse order.
Cautiously
In one
optimistic.
word. Yeah.
That is 2
Cautiously
words.
optimistic. Manish is cautiously now everybody will pick from that. Everybody will be cautiously optimistic.
Optimistic.
Okay.
Be choosy.
opportunity still exists.
Okay. Ramdev ji.
Bullish, I would say.
Ramesh, Prashant, Sunil.
Mahalakshmi, I would say we are in mother of all the bull markets.
Awesome. Awesome.
But we don't see 75,000. So,
Mother is very weak.
we
So
need
this
to
is
pause.
the last round. I'm going to post some stocks, and you have to. This is the musical round, and in the spirit of Diwali, I'm going to just name some stocks, and you have to say what is the first song that comes to your mind. Tata Steel.
100 साल पहले मुझे तुमसे प्यार था, आज भी है. At least that's the only company of relevance which is over 100 years old. And it's been a doubler for us here. So.
That's a very good one, Devina.
Zomato.
Zomato, I was just thinking for this one. Zomato will sing सिर जो तेरा चकराए, मेरी वैल्यूएशन देके सिर जो तेरा चकराए, या whatever, दिल घुमा जाए, आजा प्यास तुम्हारे, वैल्यूएशन देके, whatever the words are.
Okay, HDFC. Samir, this is for you. HDFC.
Old is gold.
नहीं गाना चाहिए ना.
गाना चाहिए.
सालों साल का रिश्ता का कोई गाना बनाओ. हाँ? सालों साल का रिश्ता.
खंबे जैसी खड़ी है.
मुझे तुमसे प्यार था.
नहीं वो तो हो चुका ना एक बारी.
एक ही हो गया.
रिपीट हो रहा है.
DMart.
जब कोई तुम्हारा हृदय तोड़ दे, तड़पता हुआ कोई तुम्हें छोड़ दे, तब मेरे पास आधा प्रिय है. HDFC, I think this fits well. You can keep coming back to it.
DMart. This is for Ramesh.
Well, I thought about that in the spirit of levity. I will say, तुझे देखा तो ये जाना सनम, प्यार होता है दीवाना सनम.
Awesome. Okay, Bharat Electronics, again for you, Ramesh.
I mean, just to remind everyone, Bharat Electronics in 2003 was 300 crores. Today is 50,000 crore market cap. So with that preface, जब प्यार किया तो डरना क्या, जब प्यार किया तो डरना क्या, the famous song sang by Madhubala and Mughal Azam.
Absolutely fantastic. Devina, Paytm.
आगे भी जाने न तू, पीछे भी जाने न तू, जो भी है बस यही एक पल है.
Very good.
DRHP says that they don't know whether they'll ever make profits. So.
Sunil, Route Mobile.
I think it's done very well for us. तो देने वाला जब भी देता देता छप्पर फाड़ के.
And Mastek?
I thought about it. तू चीज बड़ी है मस्त मस्त.
Sure. Prashant, NTPC.
इंतहा हो गई इंतजार की आईना की खबर मेरे यार की ये हमें है यकीन बेवफा वो नहीं फिर वजह क्या हुई इंतजार की.
Very good.
Very good.
Excellent.
SBI.
आइए आपका इंतजार था देर लगी आने में तुझको तुमको शुक्र है फिर भी आए तो सही.
Madhu Nazara.
I can't think of an apt song for it. Give me some time.
Okay, IDFC.
Give me a little while. Let me come back.
Okay.
IDFC, you have to just say जो वादा किया वो निभाना पड़ेगा.
Ah,
Good one. Correct.
yeah, exactly. I'll second.
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay, this one is for RIL. Anybody?
There's a very apt song of Frank Sinatra which says I did it my way.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Yeah,
truly done it
absolutely.
very uniquely their way.
Absolutely.
You must applaud it.
Sure. That is definitely a song that all of you can sing. All of you have done it your way. And that really brings us to the end of this discussion. Thank you, gentlemen, so much. And Devina, thank you so much for joining me on this very auspicious occasion. And it's a conversation that I'm going to remember for a long, long time. And found all your views very useful. I'm sure our audience will appreciate it too. Thank you so much.